I would definitely say that the moment, you usually, you don't know when the moment's going to happen, but I do think that the moment where everything changed in the United States, no question, was when Reagan fired the air traffic controllers who were striking.
Right, August of 81, yeah.
And that was, listen, he was especially during his first term. We can spend an entire day talking about what a disastrous second term Reagan had, but his first term, he was immensely popular and he was basically able to do whatever he wanted. And the day he fired those air traffic controllers and not a single union decided to walk out on the job was basically the day that labor was dead. And it was just a question of how long it was going to take. But I do think that there is an opportunity right now for that moment to go in the other direction. And that, of course, is if the Bessemer, Alabama labor workers at the Amazon facility are able to form a union. Right. I do think that that will be the moment that changes everything for the labor movement in the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Bernie has obviously come out for it. A number of others as well have too. I believe Ro Khanna has. I do think the importance of those workers forming a union against the most powerful man on earth right now, I think could potentially be a major game changer for the labor movement in this country. What do you think about that?
I think your analysis is brilliant. I think you're spot on.
Don't fill his head with that. Do not do that. Oh,
I've been talking up the action down in Alabama, but these are monster slayers, Goliath slayers. They're taking down the richest man in the world, the biggest corporation, one of the biggest corporations in America. And if they succeed, it hadn't occurred to me how huge the consequences would be, but I think that your analysis is absolutely right. Reagan, when he came into office, he had basically two jobs to do. The first was to dial back on the wealth of the middle class, because everybody on the conservative side believed that Russell Kirk's 1951 prediction that if the middle class got too wealthy, you would see society be torn apart by the forces that would be unleashed. Everybody on the conservative side believed that to be true. And so Reagan had to reduce the wealth of the middle class, which he did. And number two, he wanted to defund the Democratic Party. The Republicans hadn't held the U.S. House of Representatives except for 2 years, 48, 49, since 1932. And they still didn't until 1996. They had it one more time. But the other thing was to rip the financial guts out of the Democratic Party. And in 1976 and 78, in the Buckley and Bellotti decisions, when the Supreme Court said that giving money to a politician, owning a politician in exchange for that money giving you legislation, that was no longer to be considered bribery or political corruption. And instead, that was called free speech, that money wasn't actually money. Those two Supreme Court decisions just opened a floodgate of cash into the GOP, which Reagan coasted on right into the White House. But the Democrats at that time, they said, we don't need to take that money because we got all this money coming from the unions, because the unions were literally awash in cash. 1/3 of America had a union job. And so average people through their union dues were funding the Democratic Party, and they were just fine with it because the Democratic Party was giving them back what they wanted with, Social Security and Medicare.
And how many people are in a union today? Less
right,
than
6%. 6% of the American private workforce. Yeah, and in fact, Reagan so effectively gutted the funding for the Democratic Party by cutting in half the union movement in just 12 years, in just his and Bush's administration, that Bill Clinton and Al Fromm had
in 86, I think it was, right around there. That's where they first. Yeah, and they decided, hey, listen, the unions don't have the money anymore. We'll get in bed with the big banks, and that was it. And that was all.
That's right. They created this thing called the DLC to funnel money into the Democratic Party because the unions couldn't do it anymore. And they thought, we'll take good money, right? We'll take money from the banks and the insurance companies because that's white collar stuff. Nobody's getting killed by that like they do in oil and steel. We'll leave that to the Republicans. Yeah, how'd that work out?
No, it's I always say especially when people ask, what are my thoughts about third parties? I say I'd be happy with two, because right now we don't have a labor party. And that is a huge problem. So if you can't have two corporate parties that are only really separated by a few social issues and yet are still taking money from the same people, it's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Did you hear what Biden said yesterday, though, about unions?
No.
He said he was doing a little riff about his Build Back Better thing, and he said, and this time we're going to be damn sure, I'm paraphrasing here, but we're going to be damn sure, he was quite emphatic, we're going to be damn sure that it's union labor that rebuilds this country, not just labor.
Well, I'd like to see that.
I haven't heard a president talk like that since Lyndon Johnson.
You know what's going to allow us to do that? You know, those $2 trillion in tax cuts that Trump got, turn those $2 trillion around and give us an infrastructure bill based on clean energy jobs.
I agree. And roll back George W. Bush's $2.5 trillion of the tax cuts, and roll back Reagan's tax cuts, and take us back to the 74% top tax bracket that you only hit after you make $3, $4, $5 million a year. Take us back to that tax bracket that we had, you know, for the first couple of years, for the first year of the Reagan administration, through Carter's administration, through Ford's administration, through Nixon's administration. You know, LBJ dropped it to 74% from 91%, which, you know, Jack Kennedy blew up the economy, grew the economy with. Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican, loved that 90% top tax bracket. Harry Truman. I mean, you know, it's so ahistoric to say high taxes destroy the economy when the three consecutive decades, the only 3 consecutive decades in the history of America where we had, you know, annual GDP growth that was greater than 3% per year were the 50s, 60s, and 70s. To say, and the top tax rate was 90%. And then just in the last 2 years of that period, it was dropped down to 74%. But LBJ bragged about the fact that taxes on rich people went up when he dropped that tax, because most of what he was doing was closing loopholes. And so the tax collections on rich people went up. You know, and the supply siders will say, well, that's because he lowered the taxes. No, it's because he closed the loopholes. Anyhow, I'm sorry, I'm ranting again here, Edge.
No, but he's a great ranter. We're speaking with Thom Hartmann of the Thom Hartmann Show. His book is the hidden history of the American oligarchy. It's not so hidden anymore.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.